Hello and welcome to this video, and this video is going to be entitled 10 albums that are 30 years old. And these albums for me relate to the whole progressive rock and jazz fusion genre, the genre that we cover on this channel. Okay, so where do we start with this? As a musician growing up in the 80s was a little bit barren in terms of progressive rock and jazz fusion. There wasn't much progressive rock. You had some neo-prog, Marillion and stuff like that, which I wasn't so keen on. Jazz fusion had gone very sort of yuppie-fied and corporate, with a lot of strutting about in trendy clothes and playing, lackluster solos over, you know, grooves that sounded like they were off a soundtrack to an American television sitcom. It had all gone really bad. And as the 80s came to an end, the music scene changed. Hip hop suddenly got serious. Dance music emerged. Electronic music emerged. Dance music turned into jungle and drum and bass. Here in the UK, we had that whole rave scene, and then that rave scene went all hippified. And at the back of that, there seemed to be a renaissance of music where you had highly um, experimental, boundary pushing music that was selling in some cases lots and lots of records and getting in the charts. We're thinking of bands like The Orb, Future Sound of London, Bjork, all people, these sort of artists that were pushing the envelope. For me, this is like the second progressive era. It echoes the first one. We even have bands like Radiohead coming out with OK Computer, which is almost like the dark side of the moon of that era in the 90s. This transition to all that exciting grunge, electronic dance music, rave, hip hop, the reaction of the progressive reaction to that comes out in the 90s starts around 92, 93. So 93 is a little bit of a watershed year where we start to see some really incredible albums reflecting what's happened in music at that time. This is a groundbreaking period of music which doesn't get talked about that much, and I'm going to try and talk about it now. I've brought in a broad list here, um, and I of 10 of my favorite albums from 1993. Some of them are very popular, some of them aren't. Some of them are allied to popular music, some of them aren't. Some of them relate to electronic music, some of them relate to metal and grunge, but they are all their own thing. I love all these 10 albums. I want to celebrate them now. I cannot believe they're 30 years old. It only seems like the other day that I was going down the record shop and buying CDs and pulling out these albums, going home and just having this mind-blowing experience of checking out this incredible music after the 1980s, which had been a bit barren for incredible new music. Right, so I'm going to start. These aren't ranked, but there are 10 of them. At number 10, I've got Radio by Naked City. In 1992, Naked City, which is a band fronted by John Zorn, which features, among others, I think Fred Frith on bass, Joey Barron on drums, the incredible guitarist as oh, this is oh, I hate when this happens. This is one of the most important jazz guitarists, Dave Bill Frisell. Got there. Senior moment. Bill Frisell on guitar. Shall I just stop there? Right. I think 89 they bring out their debut album Naked City, which is a cross between sort of uh movie soundtracks, death metal, free jazz, cut-ups, experimental music. An incredible album, Naked City. They in 92 they bring out Grand Guignol, which is one of my favorite albums of all time, and I've recently talked about on my 10 greatest alternative prog albums, which of course it is an alternative prog album. In 93 we have this incredible album by Naked City called Radio. And on Radio, they push the complexity angle much further out. Anybody who is impressed with the virtuosity of a Yes or Genesis needs to go and check what these guys are doing. Oh my God. My phone's going now. Hang on. It's Jack Jennings, a guest of this channel. You right, Jack? I'm all right. Can I call you back in a bit? I'm actually in the middle of a YouTube video and I've decided just to answer it. As you've been a guest on the channel, I thought I'd answer the phone. So this one's not going well at all. It's going to be a right mess. So I just thought I'll go with it. So can I call you back in a bit, Jack? All right. See you in a bit. Bye bye. Yeah, that was Jack, who he came on the channel a few months ago and talked about Shakti. We did some jamming. We're doing a project called Nataraja at the moment, which is a sort of fusion of sort of Indian classical music, Jimi Hendrix and Mahavishnu. I'm very excited about it. And that's what we're chatting about. Anyway, at number 10, Naked City Radio, an incredibly avant-garde, complex, cut up exploration of extremes of all different music. I've talked about John Zorn a lot on this channel. He really is one of the great progressive rock musicians, one of the great progressive jazz musicians. What can I say? Naked City, an incredible album at number 10. Right. At number 9, I put on the list Tokyo Live by John McLaughlin. John McLaughlin sort of disappears in the 80s after the Reform Mahavishnu project, which never lived up to the expectations we had for it. And he sort of disappears. He returns eventually after doing some quiet duo work with Jonas Hellborg, with a trio which features Kai Ekgard on bass, Charlotte Gertu on percussion, and him on an acoustic guitar. And he makes an album called Live at Royal Festival Hall, which is sort of his return to form. I really believe that the Live at Royal Festival Hall, which is a gig I actually was at, is perhaps his greatest album of the last 40 years. And he's renewed by that. The follow-up album, Che Allegra, absolutely incredible album. And then suddenly he's back on electric guitar and he's playing in a sort of organ trio style band with Dennis Chambers on drums and the late great Joey DeFrancesco on organ. And he makes this album, Tokyo Live. And this was a return for me to McLaughlin playing electric guitar in a way we wanted to hear him play, where he was unbounded and just playing. And it's an incredible album. I saw this tour live and it was absolutely mind-blowing. This trio then turns into the heart of things and he starts to lay the groundwork for a fusion style, which he has then just since extrapolated on right up to his most recent band. And I think the seeds of that, the seeds of turning to electric. And remember, even going back to Shakti, he's really pursued electric guitar ever since, so this is a very important album. It's also a fantastic album. It does meander. It meanders a little bit, which I like. John's just playing, and there's sometimes where you go, God, this track has gone on for a long time, but of course I would have rather had that than the sort of buttoned up 80s sort of tight corporate jazz fusion that he made with the Mahavishnu project back then. And I'm not referring to Greg Bendian's incredible Mahavishnu project. I just meant the Mahavishnu because he actually wasn't called the Mahavishnu when he returned in the 80s. It was just called Mahavishnu. Anyway, that's what I've got at number 9. Is Tokyo Live by John McLaughlin, 30 years old this year. Okay. At number 8, we have an album by Alan Holdsworth called Hard Hat Area. I think it's massively underrated. No one ever mentions it. I think it's one of his great albums. We could sort of divide Holdsworth up into sort of, I'd say, 3 periods at least. There's the initial closer to heavy metal and rock period, which produces the first IOU album, the first the Metal Fatigue and Road Games, and I think they're the albums that are usually liked by the more rock end of the market. So it's definitely the way in if you're a metaler that's just got impressed with just the sheer speed of Alan's playing. There's vocals on there, albeit very strange vocals. Then we get the guitar synth period at Tavakron and Sand, moving to Secrets. On Secrets, which I think is his greatest album, we see the return of electric guitar a lot more. And then he makes a number of albums, which is a sort of moving towards a much more jazz-styled approach, which ends with 16 Men of Tain, which for many jazzers is his favorite album. Stuck in the middle of that is Hard Hat Area, which is a burning album, somewhere between Secrets heavier version of Secrets, but moving towards the jazzier style of 16 Men of Tain. With the incredible Gary Husband on drums, I always feel, as great as Chad Wackerman is, and the valiant efforts of other drummers to play with Alan, and of course Vinny's drumming on Secrets is sublime. But I think there's a special relationship between Alan Holdsworth and Gary Husband, and it's unevidenced on this album. There's an incredible track called Hard Hat Area, which prefigures what he's going to do on the Flat Tire album, which he's exploring synthesis and electronics. So it's almost like Alan's take on electronica, and using all these industrial sounds created by the syntax with his guitar, he just portrays this, you know, as though you're working through a building site and you can hear all the machinery going on. And it's another side of Alan that is just so interesting. So that's why I got number 8 back from 1993, Hard Hat Area. At number 7, I've got from Praxis, their second album, Sacrifice, which also features John Zorn. It's got Bootsy Collins on it. It's got Mick Harris from Napalm Death. What a mind-blowing album this is. Sacrificed is like the vile offspring of death metal and free jazz. When I teach my students and they come in and they say they're really into heavy metal and they play me what they think is heavy, I always go, well, do you want to hear this album that's been made by these avant-garde jazz guys? And I stick on Sacrifice, and their face when the first track opens up is always a picture. It's a mind-blowing, heavy, destructive, incredible album. The first Praxis album is a wild trip. Lots of Parliament funkadelic mixed with blast beats, electronica, hip hop sampling, turntabling. The third album, Metatron, is a bit like a psychedelic sort of funkadelic metal, you know, and that's a beautiful album, great album. But for me, my favorite album by Praxis is Sacrifice. It's this album. It's just so mind-warpingly heavy and mind-warpingly in your face. So that's what I got at number 7 is Sacrifice, an incredible album. At number 6, I've got Give a Monkey a Brain by Fishbone. There's that whole funk metal thing. This is the one bit of the sort of late 80s, early 90s that doesn't get mentioned. We have dance music, we've got hip hop, we've got grunge, all these new forms of music that are just freshening it up. But also funk metal, Red Hot Chili Peppers, 24/7 Spies, Suicidal Tendencies, a whole host of bands, Infectious Grooves, you know, and to some extent bands like Primus and Faith No More. This was where rock got its balls back, basically, and funk metal played a big part of this. You know, I can remember being blown away by Anthrax teaming up with Public Enemy. You know, it is an incredible time for metal. Metal had just gone so sad. You've got this horrible hair metal with all these ponce around with makeup on, and then suddenly we're back on track. We got some incredible bands coming out. For me, the greatest of all these bands would be Fishbone. Fishbone just had that funk metal thing combined with a sort of two-tone ska sound. They've got sounds that go back to sort of avant-garde jazz, then back to sort of early jazz, and really incredible band. I saw them live 3 times, and they were just absolutely mind-blowing. So this album is not my favorite album. My favorite album by Fishbone is Reality of My Surroundings, and I mentioned that in my 10 favorite albums, which I think came out the year before, maybe even 91, 92. In 93, we have Give a Monkey a Brain, and you could see that the labels behind this is their big moment. They had a minor hit record with Everyday Sunshine off Reality of My Surroundings. Living Colour had come out, another incredible band that I haven't put on the list, but they made Stains this year, if my memory serves me right. And for me, that was the weakest of the 3 albums, but still in a really great album. It nearly made the list. And Living Colour had also scored some crossover hits, so you could see Fishbone were angling to do that. They came out with a video for the track Swim, which was this big loping sort of stoner rock riffy track, incredible. And this album is a lot heavier than Reality of My Surroundings, but it also in places is more avant-garde than anything on Reality of My Surroundings. And there's some beautiful songs like Black Flowers is absolutely beautiful song. Servitude, sort of almost like progressive metal, but with this funky vibe to it. Absolutely incredible album. Give a Monkey Brain. Brilliant album. 93, 30 years old. Can you believe it? In 93, one of my favorite musicians in history, Steve Vai, formed a band. That band was almost like a super group with T.M. Stevens that had played with a whole host of people, including John McGoughlin in the late 70s on bass. One of my drum gods on drums, Terry Bozzio, and the incredible and very young at the time, Devin Townsend on vocals. And they made an album called Sex and Religion. This was not a Steve Vai project. This was a band, and it was an incredible band. This album, which sort of took Vai's approach to sort of that virtuoso guitar techno rock thing, and then fuses that with the influences coming from grunge and the influences coming from thrash metal and screamcore type of stuff, all orchestrated into a really incredible album. This album seems to have got lost in the whole Vai catalog, Alien Love Secrets that I think came out after that seems to get pulled out a lot of time on live shows, and of course we have Passion and Warfare and there's stuff off Flexible. This album seems to get missed off. I've put it on a number of times. I think it's absolutely brilliant. Some of Vai's best guitar playing, the production's incredible, the orchestration of the songs is brilliant, and there are some really, really good songs. I think more recently with Vai trying to sing on songs, and Vai's got a good voice, but Devin Townsend has got one of the most incredible rock voices of all time, and he is off the scale on this album. This is an incredible album. By the time I saw them live, Bozzio had gone. I think T.M. Stevens was gone. The heat and the excitement had been taken out of that band. I was very let down when I saw them on tour putting this album out, and I think that may have been what scuppered it, or it just did not fit into the prospective fan bases because it didn't seem to go down that well. But I absolutely love this album, and I would put this up there as one of my favorite Steve Vai albums. So that's what I got. Number 5 is Sex and Religion by Steve Vai. 93 was a sad year for me in that one of the greatest musicians of all time died in December 93, and that would be Frank Zappa. He managed to get one album out in 93, which is his great final statement, which was The Yellow Shark. Zappa, who was as much an orchestral composer as he was an avant-garde rock musician or blues musician or comedy musician. He was all of these things. And he'd right from before he was even signed with his early soundtrack albums that he composed whilst, barely out of the teenage years, so precocious these was, soundtracks to films like Run Home Slow, and then his orchestral work with Lumpy Gravy, and then they used the orchestra on 200 Motels, and then orchestral favorites, and then we get The Perfect Stranger, London Symphony Orchestra albums. All the way through, Zappa has experimented with writing for orchestras and large ensembles, and he was never happy. When you read his biography, he just did not get from those players the commitment to his compositions that he got from the players in his actual rock band, which is really interesting, until he meets the ensemble that is featured on this album, The Yellow Shark, which I think was called the Ensemble Moderne. Those guys were committed to doing what was required to perform Zappa's music, so at one point he's got one of the players playing a didgeridoo into a big bucket of water, and so this concert, and I can remember being a huge Zappa fan of hearing this concert that happened and that Zappa recorded it. And I think here with the Yellow Shark we have the finest example of Zappa's orchestral output. He seemed really happy for it. When you watch the video, it's just so joyful. This is Zappa's last great album. At the same time, he was working on an album of synclavier material called Civilization Phase 4. I waited for that, thinking that this would be his great statement, his great final statement. I'd heard so much about it. I was a little bit let down by that. Many people on the channel will go, why don't you mention Civilization Phase 4? For me, Jazz from Hell was groundbreaking. At that point, we never heard anything. By the early 90s, the Synclavier, people were more aware of it. What Zappa was doing was absolutely incredible on there. Incredible, sorry, not uncredible, incredible. The whole huge epic Enlight. It's a brilliant album. But for me, um, I'd like to hear the real musicians, and the shock of Jazz from Hell um, was a great shock to have at that time. And of course, Zappa was exploring areas which have now gone on to become the way that you make music. But for me, his great final statement is the Yellow Shark, which is an absolute masterpiece. And anyone who really wants to get proof of Zappa's compositional chops, go and check that album out. Right. Number 3, I have The Tao of Mad Fat by Steve Coleman. This is probably the best M-Bass album. M-Bass was a style of jazz, which is almost like a new type of jazz fusion created by Steve Coleman, who was really like the John Coltrane of the last 40 years. There's a whole host of musicians that have come out of the jazz scene because of Steve Coleman. Initially, people like Greg Osby, Cassandra Wilson, and then here there was people like oh God, sorry about this. This happens. I'm trying to do my best. I keep going, you know. But anyway, the whole M-Bass thing, there's an album called the M-Bass Collective. You can check that out. There's a whole bunch of sort of American jazz musicians that were creating a new type of fusion. When I hear what's going on now on Instagram in the jazz fusion world, and I check out that whole new way of playing, that sort of hyperkinetic, cut up time signature way of playing. It's like a watered down version of M-Bass. Steve Coleman is an absolute genius. I've done videos on him on this channel before. I've tried to get his name out there. He's not that well known, even in the jazz community, and these albums aren't that well known. By the early 90s, I think M-Bass was at his peak, and he made a live album called The Tao of Mad Fat, which is absolutely incredible. 30 years old. If you want to go and check out M-Bass, then that's the album to go and check out. At number 2, I have the debut album by Michelle Ndegeocello, Plantation Lullabies. Now, Michelle Ndegeocello is a rapper, multi-instrumentalist, songwriter. She, for me, is one of the greatest rappers of all time. But of course, she goes way beyond that genre. She's also got a foot in what has now become neo soul, but she's not neo soul. Michelle Ndegeocello, for me, is one of the greatest songwriters, I would say, to emerge in the last 30 years. The debut album is mind blowing, and it's actually a lot of the players that were involved with Michelle Ndegeocello were coming out of that M-Bass scene. Plantation Lullabies is an incredibly funky, politically motivated, jazzy album that just is so hard hitting, because so much of that neo soul stuff can get very close to being very music-y and easy listening. Michelle Ndegeocello is never easy listening. Since making this album, she's gone on to do sort of acoustic stuff and stuff that's like almost like John Coltrane. She's an absolute genius artist. I've talked about her elsewhere on the channel. I'm not going to keep going because I've talked about this album before, but it had to be on the list. So at number 2, I've got Plantation Lullabies. At number 1, I've picked an album which for me represents, especially here in Britain, that move to a progressive mentality that happens around this time. And this is going to produce artists like Square Pusher, Future Sounds of London, Photek or Tekra, Radiohead, Goldie, Ronnie Size. There's going to be this sort of renaissance of progressive music. The sort of Kate Bush-esque queen of it. If you think of the way Kate Bush relates to progressive rock, the sort of Kate Bush-esque queen of this movement would be Björk. Björk had sort of emerged in the late 80s in the indie band Sugar Cubes. She'd been a sort of child prodigy singing Icelandic folk songs. She moves to London in I think the late 80s, early 90s, and negotiates a deal doing something completely different. And she hooks up with the sort of cream of experimental pioneering musicians that are coming out of the electronic dance music scene, I suppose, at that time. And this debut album reflects that. There is tracks on here that sound like techno. There's a one track that's sort of almost recorded, well, I think it is recorded in the toilets of a nightclub. Incredible. This album is mind-blowing. I always rate higher Bjork's later albums because this is a debut, and obviously she from this point really goes on a journey into the depths of music. But you go back to this debut album and it is quite incredible, actually. And it's one of the greatest debuts ever made, I think. It explores in jazz standards with incredible harps voicing the sounds with the twisting and the depth of harmony that you expect from jazz standards. And then you get these like full-on techno tracks, and in between there, these weird, quirky electronica tracks. Bjork is at her most accessible here. The pop sensibilities are high. She is at her most melodic as well. It is a pop sensibility, which of course put about 5 of these records into the charts and made her one of the iconic pop artists of all time. But Bjork is a heavyweight artist, and if I was ranking the albums on here, she would be at number 1. So those are 10 albums that came out in 1993, which I think were well worth mentioning and talking about. Anyone's got an interest in this channel, I hope there'll be something that you'll want to go and check out on that list. I hope you didn't mind this new way of me doing videos. I don't know whether I'm going to keep on doing it like this. I don't know whether the quality's high enough. We'll see. If it's okay and you don't mind me doing this sort of microphone, webcam. I've got this new webcam, you see, which I think it's pretty good quality, but I just don't know whether it vibes with the camera. If any of you are watching this on a big screen, you might be saying it looks a bit pixely. I don't know. I've never been a quality person, right? I've always gone with the adage: if something's worth doing, it's worth doing badly, right? And I love to explore the vibe rather than the quality. I think sometimes you get bogged down in quality. If I went down that route of getting a big posh camera and filming it all from multi angles and editing it, and then I'd have to start scripting it, and I would then start cutting bits out where I went a bit wrong and I lost my way. And I'm not into that at all. I like this raw approach, and this method here that I'm using with this setup with the mic and this camera allows me to be a lot more raw than I have before. Maybe that's what I'll do with this setup, is when I want to be raw, I'll use this. And when I want to be a bit more posh, I'll get the proper camera out. You lot have never seen my actual camera, have you? I'm going to show you it. Hang on. Because this is the great existential philosophical metaphor for life, is that we can never actually be entirely objective. Well, when we're objective as a species, we're actually pretending that we're God. And we may well be God, who knows? We cannot see ourselves from an objective point of view. And everyone who's watched this channel, every single video has been filmed from this subjective point, which is my camera. But now you can see it. Now, when I show you, this is the camera here that I have filmed all my videos on, except for this one, right? Don't you find that fascinating? Don't you find that very interesting that you can do that here, but we cannot actually do that with ourselves. We cannot step outside ourselves and look back in. The only thing we can't see are our own eyeballs. It's really interesting. Now, there's a bit of bizarre existentialist philosophy to end this video. And the reason I've just done that is to prove that when we do this with YouTube, we can just do whatever we want. We can just go wherever we want, whenever we want, right? And I think that's an incredible thing. And that's what I love about YouTube. So this little method I've got with this new camera, right, that you can't see, I can't show you it, allows me to be a little bit more free-flowing than I have before. It speeds the process up, you see, because if I filming. This is what you're seeing now. Really, just have no interest of you how I make these videos. But for me, there's a philosophical point here that's interesting because it's like a Brechterian. It's that Brechterian moment where you sort of pick the camera up like this, and then you suddenly expose everything else that's going on. You know, this whole environment that you never get to see. This is something really fascinating to me. You know, that feeling of suddenly seeing, you know, and seeing round here. There we go. That's what I'm looking at. That's why I'm not quite looking at you because I've got my notes here. I've just got my list there, and then I've got the shot of me in that there, and I'm tending to read off my list and look at me to make sure it's all going right. This turning in on itself is a really interesting idea. How does this relate to the albums of 1993? I don't think it does it? Right. I think I'm done. I think I'm done. I feel more comfortable with this setup actually being even more bonkers, to be honest. The only thing I don't like is I'm having a tendency to look at my notes when I'm talking. I should be looking at the camera, shouldn't I? But at the end of this video, you've sort of seen the inner workings, right? Which I hope is interesting. I don't know. I'm just rambling on now, aren't I? Shall I go? Well, if you like this video, press like. If you want to see more videos of an old man rambling, then press subscribe or even press the notification bell. Now I've got this set up, I'm going to be able to do even more stuff in Patreon, and my Patreon is rammed full of stuff. If you go to Patreon, you're going to spend a long time getting through all the stuff over at Patreon. So if you want to really go into depth and explore, you know, and go into the secret world of Andy Edwards, then go over to my Patreon. The link's down below there. And I think I'm done. I'm going to see you on the next video. So what I've got to do now is make sure I shut off record before I end, because on the last video I didn't do that, and I think there's a little bit of me going whoa and getting all confused. But you like it when I get confused, I know. I'm going to stop recording now. Bye.